Gems of Buddhist Wisdom. Status of Women in Buddhism, 24. By Venerable Dr. K. Sri Dhammananda. His social attitude towards women has been marked by discrimination backed by prejudices as well as religious bias. Thus, discrimination against women is undoubtedly a common feature in all societies. The prejudices and obstacles faced by women are similar, be it in Africa, Asia, America, or Europe. It is a peculiar disability experienced by women and has its basis in religious bias. It is from religion then that the concept of a woman's basic disability originated. Here, she is depicted as a temptress and she is invariably warned against in most of the religions of the world. Some social bias is based on popular beliefs. According to certain religious myths, man was introduced as the son of God. The strange thing is woman has never been given a similar status as the daughter of God. Amongst the group of soul believers, there are those who hold the notion that a soul exists only in man but not in woman. Those who claim that woman has a soul would not give credence that her soul could ever find a place in heaven after her death. These are some of the strange beliefs which show clearly the nature of the discrimination against women which is prevalent in the world. Women have been attributed the worst qualities of mankind. They are regarded as the source of all the sins of the world, even to the extent of being blamed for the misfortunes that men face in this world and as well as in the next. Rites and rituals. Among certain religious cults, women are barred from practicing certain rites and rituals on the basis of their being merely a woman. At one time, they were even prohibited from reading the scriptures. Their punishment for doing so was to have their tongues cut out. Apart from that, they were also discouraged from entering places of worship, even if they were allowed to participate in religious practices. Such participation was only confined within their own homes, pertaining to household religious ceremonies. At present, even though many barriers have been removed, these hindrances and obstructions in the light of moral and spiritual upliftment of women still exists in varying degrees. Demarcation between man and woman. Historically, the social attitude towards women can be traced back into pre-Buddhist days from the early Vedic literature, for instance, the Rigveda. There is evidence indicating the honor and respect which women formerly received in their homes. From the religious angle, they also had access to the highest knowledge of the Absolute or Brahma. However, this liberal attitude changed in the course of time. This is due to the influence and the dominance of the priests with their ritualistic practices like priestcraft and animal sacrifices, to name a few. The scriptures were then given new interpretations, and women came to be considered inferior to men, both physically and mentally. This demarcation between man and woman is manifested in the social and domestic sphere, where woman is seen as comparatively inferior. For instance, a woman is looked down upon as a mere possession or as an object. Her place was in the home, and she was subjected to the whims and fancies of her husband. She not only had to perform all the domestic chores, but also to bring up a large family. For example, some of the Brahmins married and lived with their wives, and yet regarded the food cooked by women as impure and as unfit to eat. From instances like these, a myth was built up. Women were being stigmatized as sinful, and it was thought that the only way to keep them out of mischief was to have them endlessly occupied with the task of motherhood and various domestic duties. There was a strong belief that there must be a male child for the continuance of the family line and the performance of the rites of the ancestors. The traditional belief was that only a son could carry out such rituals, which were thought to be necessary for bringing peace and security to his father and grandfather after their deaths. Otherwise, it was believed that the departed ones may return as ghosts to harass the family. Therefore, the ability to produce a son was very important to a married woman. On the other hand, if a married woman had no child, or if she had failed to produce any male offspring, she might be superseded by a second or third wife, or even be turned out of the house according to this belief one viewed. From the angle of the importance attached to the birth of a son to a married woman, we know that the life of a married woman was uncertain, depending on whether she could produce any son or not. Yet this does not mean that the lives of unmarried women were any less uncertain than their married sisters. Marriage was therefore considered a holy sacrament. Thus, a young girl who did not marry was despised by society and held as the object of their criticism. Spiritually, in the field of religious practices, the position which women once enjoyed was also denied them. Accordingly, it was believed that a woman was incapable of reaching heaven through her own merits. Furthermore, she could not worship by herself. It was also believed that she could only reach heaven through unquestioning obedience to her husband, even if the husband in question happened to be a wicked person. It was also accepted that the food left over by her husband was often the food for her. These examples show the extent of the inequality between man and woman. As it is stated by the Buddha, by contrast to such bigoted practices that hinder spiritual development, Buddhism can be claimed to be the least discriminatory in attitudes towards women. There is no doubt at all that the Buddha was the first religious teacher who gave women equal and unfettered opportunities in the field of spiritual development. Although he had on several occasions pointed out the natural tendencies and weaknesses of women in general, he also gave due credit to their abilities and capabilities. He truly paved the way for women to lead a full religious life. This implied that they were equally able to develop and purify their minds and realize the bliss of nibbana as well as men. This fact is amply proven by the testimonies of the thens, nuns, during the Buddha's time. The teachings of the Buddha did a great deal to wipe off numerous superstitious beliefs and meaningless rites and rituals, which also included sacrifices, from the minds of many people. When the Buddha revealed the true nature of life and death, and explained the natural phenomena which govern the universe to these people, they began to understand. This subsequently arrested and corrected the prevailing social injustices and prejudices. Thus it enabled women to lead their own way of life. Although the Buddha had elevated the status of women socially, he also pointed out the social and psychological differences that exist between men and women. This was shown in the manner in which he was realistic in his observations. His advice, given from time to time, seen in the light of his observations, was practical. These many instances were clearly depicted in the Anguttara Nikaya and Samyutta Nikaya. It was mentioned that a man's duty is his unending quest for knowledge. He should improve and stabilize his skills and craftsmanship, and be dedicated to his work. He must also be able to find the means to maintain and sustain his family. On the other hand, it was also stated that it was the woman's duty to look after her home and her husband. The Anguttara Nikaya contains valuable advice which the Buddha had given to young girls prior to their marriage. Foreseeing the difficulties that will arise with the new in-laws, the Buddha advised the girls to give every respect to their parents-in-law, serving them as lovingly as they were their own parents. They were also requested to honor and respect their husbands' relatives and friends so that a congenial and happy atmosphere will be created in their new homes. They were advised to study and understand their husband's nature, ascertain their husband's activities, character, and temperament, and to be useful and cooperative at all times in their new homes. They should be polite, kind, and watchful in their relationship with the servants. They should also safeguard their husband's earnings and ascertain that all household expenditure was economically maintained. Such is the timeless quality of the Buddha's advice. The Buddha appreciated that peace and harmony in a home is to a great extent ensured by a woman. Thus, his advice to women on their role in their married life was realistic and practical. He listed a good number of day-to-day qualities which a woman should or should not emulate. On diverse occasions, the Buddha advised that a wife should not harbor evil thoughts against her husband, should not be cruel, harsh, or domineering, should not be a spendthrift but should be economical and live within her means, should zealously guard and save her husband's property and hard-earned wealth, should always be virtuous and chaste in mind and action, should be faithful and harbor no thoughts of any adulterous acts, should be refined in speech and polite in action, should be kind, industrious and hard-working, should be thoughtful and compassionate towards her husband, and her attitude should equate that of a mother loving and protecting her son, should be modest and respectful, should be cool, calm and understanding, serving not only as a wife but also as a friend and advisor to her husband when the need arises. In the days of the Buddha, other religious teachers had also spoken on the duties and obligations of a wife towards her husband. They stressed that it is the particular duty of a wife to bear an offspring for the husband, and render him faithful service and to provide conjugal happiness. This is a similar view shared by Confucianism. However, although the duties of a wife towards the husband were laid down in the Confucian Code of Discipline, it did not stress the duties and obligations of the husband towards the wife. The teachings of the Buddha was not as biased towards the husbands. In the Sigaloveda Sutta, the Buddha had explicitly stated both the duties of the husband towards the wife and vice versa. On the part of the husband, he should be faithful, courteous and not despising. It is the husband's duty to hand over authority to his wife, and from time to time, provide her with adornments. Thus, we witness the unbiased attitude shown by the Buddha towards both men and women. The Buddha had also indicated various handicaps and drawbacks a woman had to undergo. For instance, the trials and tribulations a woman had to bear in the agony of leaving her family on the day of her marriage, and the trauma of accommodating herself in a new environment fraught with problems and difficulties. Added to these are the physiological pain and suffering which a woman is subjected to during her menstrual periods, pregnancy, and childbirth. All these are but natural phenomena which depicts only the differential handicaps and circumstances prevailing between a man and a woman. The Buddha's teachings on the real nature of life and death of karma and samsara wanderings changed social attitudes towards women during that period. This is especially so with regard to the greater importance attached to the birth of a son. Buddhism never shared the Brahmin's view that a son was essential for the father's passage to heaven. The Buddha taught that according to the law of karma, one is responsible for one's own action and its consequence. The well-being of a father or grandfather does not depend upon the action of the son or the grandson. Each individual is responsible for its sound actions. Therefore, there was no cause for the married women to be anxious just because they could not produce sons just for the sake of performing the rites of the ancestors. This also meant that daughters became quite as good as sons. It was possible, in the early Buddhist period, for a girl to remain unmarried, and yet unabused. She could be contented at her home and adequately occupied in caring for her parents, younger brothers, and sisters. She could even be the owner of great possessions. The Buddha did not attach greater importance to the birth of a son. On one occasion when King Kosala was with the Buddha, news was brought to the king of the birth of a daughter to him. Expecting a son, the king was displeased. Noticing this, the Buddha paid a glowing tribute to women, delineating their virtues in the following manner. Some women are indeed better than men. Bring her up, Lord of men. There are women who are wise, virtuous, who have high regard for mother-in-law, and who are chaste. To such noble wife may be born a valiant son, a lord of realms, who will rule a kingdom. The Buddha opened the gates for the full participation of women in the field of religion by making them eligible for admission into the Bhikkhuni Sangha, the order of nuns. This opened new avenues of culture, social services, and opportunities for public life to women. It led implicitly to the recognition of their importance to society, and in doing so enhanced the status of women. Although there were some caustic comments made in the Tripitaka about women's wiles and behavior, the Buddha also mentioned in the Samyutta Nikaya many of their redeeming features. It was said that under certain circumstances women are considered wiser and more discerning than men, and that they are also considered capable of attaining perfection or sainthood after treading the Noble Eightfold Path. Although some may sound unpleasant, through careful observation, we find that what the Buddha said about women still holds good today. Thus, in revealing the nature of women, as the Buddha did when King Kosala found that he had a daughter instead of a son, the Buddha pointed out not only their weaknesses but also their potential. The Buddha clearly showed that women are capable of understanding his teachings and also to practice them to some degree of spiritual attainment. This is clearly indicated by the advice that the Buddha gave to different women on different occasions and circumstances. The Buddha taught the lesson of impermanence to the vain and beauty-conscious Khema. Khema was the beautiful consort of King Bimbisara. She was at first reluctant to see the Buddha because she had heard that the Buddha used to refer to external beauty in disparaging terms. One day, she paid a casual visit to the monastery just to enjoy the scenery of the place. Gradually, she was attracted to the hall where the Buddha was preaching. The Buddha, through the use of his psychic powers, read her thoughts and created a vision of a young lady standing in front of her. Khema was admiring her beauty when the Buddha transformed the created beauty from youth to middle age and subsequently to old age, till it finally fell on the ground with broken teeth, gray hair, and wrinkled skin. This transformation caused Khema to realize the vanity of external beauty and to appreciate the fleeting nature of life. She then pondered, has such a body come to be wrecked like that? Then so will my body also. With this realization she subsequently attained arahatship, and with the king's consent, she entered the order of bhikkhuni. To women who were unduly emotional and grief-stricken on the loss of their beloved ones, the Buddha spoke on the inevitability of death as enunciated in the Four Noble Truths. He also quoted various parables to emphasize his point. Thus, to Visakha, a deeply emotional and affectionate grandmother who had lost her granddaughter, the Buddha spoke as follows. From affection springs grief, from affection springs fear. For one who is wholly free from affection, there is no grief, much less fear. The establishment of the Bhikkhuni Sangha, the order of nuns, in the 5th year of the Buddha's ministry paved the way for full religious freedom for women. It was successful in the sense that there were many eminent nuns who were brilliant in the study and practice of the Dhamma. In the eyes of the world, Buddhism rose highly. The Psalms of the Sisters, Therigatha, which contains 77 verses by individual nuns, is one of the prides of Buddhist literature. The nuns were not restricted by the Buddha where the teaching and preaching of the Dhamma was concerned. The Bhikkhuni order produced a remarkable number of brilliant preachers and exponents of the Dhamma like Sukha, Pattakara, Khema, Dhammadinna, and Mahapajapati, the foster mother to Siddhartha. According to Buddhism, a son was not essential for the father's passage to heaven, daughters were as good as sons, with the liberty to lead an independent life. By granting women an active share in the religious life, the Buddha also helped to raise their status in secular life. However, the admission of women into the religious life was too advanced for that period. Because of the nature of the improvement being too advanced in thinking for that particular era, people were unable to adapt themselves, thus causing a regression. Hence the period of the Bhikkhuni Sangha was short-lived because the people failed to master the situation. The Brahmins who found their privilege in the caste system threatened was another factor which caused the decline of the order. They issued hostile propaganda against this new attitude of granting women religious freedom. In Sri Lanka, the order of nuns flourished till 1017 AD in the reign of King Mahinda IV. After that it disappeared and was not revived. But the order of nuns was introduced into China by Sinhalese nuns, and it still exists there as well as in Japan today. However, in the Mahayana tradition they occupy a subordinate position which is by no means on par with the monks. Towards equality and freedom. The advent of the modern era in the 19th and 20th century was a far cry from the days of the Buddha. Women's emancipation, their quest for freedom and equality achieved tremendous strides, particularly in the West. This came about as the result of modern trends and thinking, and modern education for women in all seats of higher learning. Susan B. Anthony, an American, pioneered the drive for the equality for women in 1848, more than 148 years ago. Since then, the movement and struggle, with wider objectives, had forged ahead under various pioneer women and women's organizations. These people believed that women had a role to play in patriotic fellowship with their menfolk in contributing to the building of a better world through a better society and country. Since 1848, there were popular organized movements for equal educational opportunities, equal political rights and economic equality for women. In the West, the status of women was enhanced by conditions generated by the Industrial Revolution. humanitarian movements and women's movement for equality. But, in Asia and other countries which were not so industrially advanced, the changes were brought about by reformers with a strong religious background. In the last 50 to 60 years there had been a steady increase in women's participation in the economic, social as well as the political life of their respective countries. Such success achieved by women recently in their respective fields, in social science, in business, in economics, and even in the political field, can be described as phenomenal. Ironically, though some women had reached the almost in the political arena as prime ministers of their country, in certain other countries their contemporaries have yet to be given the franchise their right to vote. Although most countries have now adopted fairer attitudes and have opened educational and career opportunities to women, the unpleasant experiences and discriminations that they have to put up with, together with rivalries and fears, are but part of the still prevailing attitudes. It is an understatement to say that certain forms of discrimination still exist against women. International action to raise the status of women began in a small way with the now defunct League of Nations, shortly after the First World War. Subsequently, the United Nations Charter went further to grant the principles of equality and freedom to all women. The Commission on the Status of Women, an organ of the United Nations, probed the question of discrimination based on sex and deliberated on questions pertaining to the political rights of women. Equal pay for equal work, the status of women in common law, the nationality of married women, educational and economic opportunities for women, technical assistance and participation by women. Though much had been accomplished through these women's suffragette movements and international organizations in relation to greater women's participation in the social, economic and political fields, the problem of real freedom has yet to be solved. Freedom in the Buddhist sense. Real freedom is that of being free from all forms of bondage. It can be achieved only through the proper spiritual development and purification of one's own mind, of cleansing oneself from all taints of greed, hatred, and delusion. No amount of public debates, demonstrations and universal charters can bring full freedom. These can only be achieved through one's own diligence and heedfulness, through regular practice of meditation as taught by the Buddha. The Buddha, in promoting the cause of women, was considered to be the first emancipator of women and was the promoter of a democratic way of life. It is in the Buddha Dhamma that women were not despised and looked down upon, but were given status with men in their spiritual endeavor to gain wisdom and liberation. Gems of Buddhist Wisdom. Can Religion Bring Peace? 25. By K. Sri Dhammananda. Differences in interpretation. Religion and peace are two terms which may be defined and interpreted by different people, according to their religious convictions and different levels of understanding. Scholars and philosophers have looked upon religion in various ways. Some have defined it in a very narrow and limited sense, while others have given it a much broader outlook. The Oxford Dictionary defines religion as a system of faith and worship, human recognition of a personal God entitled to obedience, and the effect of such recognition on human conduct. Thomas Paine, an English philosopher, had said, "The world is my country. Mankind are my brethren, and to do good is my religion." Such an attitude towards religion and the world is essential in order to bring peace and harmony to the world we live in. H. G. Wells says, "Religion is the central part in our education that determines our mental conduct." To the famous German philosopher, Immanuel Kant, religion is the recognition of our moral principles as laws that must not be transgressed. Karl Marx, on the other hand, looked upon religion as opium of the people, offering man in his estrangement an illusory hope of happiness in a life after death, which will compensate for real evils of present existence. To Engels, religion is nothing but the fantastic reflection in men's minds of those external forces which control their early life. According to the Buddha, religion should be regarded as a noble way of life. To avoid evil, to do good, and to purify the mind, this is the teachings of all the Buddhas. The goal is one. Whatever may be the differences and interpretations, all religions would invariably agree that peace is an absolute necessity. And religion plays a vital role in the peaceful development of the individual, the family, the society, the nation and the world. Need for religious education. As the world moves deeper and deeper into an era of turmoil with more sophisticated and dangerous weapons and accompanying calamities and moral degeneration, the need for religious education is today even greater than ever before. Worries and anxieties owing to uncertainties of the future give rise to greater stresses and strains on the minds of man. The same can only be overcome with proper understanding of the nature of the mind, a subject far removed from the academically and materially oriented educational systems provided in schools and tertiary institutions today. Religion has always been the key to maintain peace of mind and to provide spiritual solace in times of emergencies such as during various calamities, or in times of invasion by aggressors and other disturbances. Primitive man worshipped their ancestors, the sun and the moon, the rivers, and so on, in order to remove their fears and insecurities. Since then, the nature of religious beliefs and methods of prayers and worship have developed tremendously. The study of history of religion will show how the objects of worship and methods of praying have evolved through the creativity and intelligence of man. These religious activities are invariably tied up with the search for peace and happiness. Man needs a religion as an anchorage, as ships in a harbor. The human mind, fickle and fluttering as it is, needs some form of aid to keep it steadfast and firm in order to make resolutions in pursuit of one's ideals in life. With the acceptance of certain religious teachings, one binds one's own mind to them, thereby enabling it to steer a straighter course than otherwise as a free thinker or a lone wolf. As a ship moored in a harbor is able to weather the strong winds and storms, so is a mind that is bound to religious principles, able to withstand the strong temptations and various other mental disturbances of life. Religious education therefore serves to stabilize the mind, to develop mental equipoise, avoiding all forms of extremes. It leads to the understanding of the true nature of life and death, and of the world within and without. It is needed to provide a deeper understanding and insight into the nature of the higher values of life, its moral and ethical content, which helps to wipe off religious fanaticism and prejudices, paving the way for religious harmony. Who is a religious person? A religious person could be seen by his own moral character through thoughts, speech, and bodily actions. One who has thoroughly purified oneself with good thoughts, good words, and good deeds is the perfect religious person from the Buddhist point of view. It is difficult to regard a person as religious if he merely goes to a place of worship and prays only for the good of himself and his family, with little regard for others. His actions are performed with sheer narrow-minded and selfish motives. On the other hand, there may be some people who have neither attended religious ceremonies, nor said prayers in places of worship, but nevertheless follow some religious principles by living a peaceful life, by trying to overcome their own weaknesses, and having sympathy, tolerance, and understanding towards others. Such people may be considered more religious than the others. An ideal for any religious person is a simple and humble life through which he may be saved from being encumbered by any material objectives and ulterior motives, and may devote his whole energy to his spiritual cultivation for the benefit of himself and others. The validity of religion. By merely observing the outward practices in the name of religion, it is not possible to understand the validity of a particular religion. For an uneducated and uninformed person may be practicing certain meaningless traditions thinking that it is the right way. To understand the real nature of any particular religion, it is necessary to study the original sources, as far as possible. The real value of religion can be understood, in its proper perspective, from its rational and harmonious teachings with its systematic practical instructions on how to correct oneself, enabling one to lead a simple, humble and moral way of life, with peace and contentment, here and now. Exhibition of mystical or miraculous powers and promise of heavenly paradise after death. And superstitious practices are mere intoxications of religions, doping the minds of the masses with thrills, emotional excitement and blind beliefs. They do not lead to the eradication of mental impurities, except perhaps to pave the way for greater craze for worldly powers, name, fame, and sensuality. In his public lectures, Swami Vivekananda had said, experience is the only source of knowledge. The same methods of investigation which we apply to the sciences, and to exterior knowledge should be applied to religion. If a religion is destroyed by such investigation, it means that that religion is nothing but a useless and unworthy collection of superstitious beliefs. The sooner it disappeared the better. Why religions should claim that they are not bound to abide by the standpoint of reason no one knows. It is better that mankind should become atheist by following reason than blindly believe in 200 million gods on the authority of anybody. Whilst avoiding the extremes of blind faith and intellectual skepticism, the religious aspirant should seek the truth with reason and wisdom. Rational method to introduce a religion. The age of occultism and mysticism is rapidly giving way to scientific knowledge and investigation. Although primitive methods of make-beliefs have served the purpose of removing some of the fears and insecurities of the unknown from the minds of many primitive people in various parts of the world, the same methods can no longer be applied to the minds of modern man. Referring to the need for a more rational outlook, the late Prime Minister of India, Shri Jawaharlal Nehru, had said that one should try to avoid three main issues in introducing a religion. They are Holy Scriptures, God idea, and the next world. He pointed out that if one should introduce a religion using any one of these three grounds, then people would tend to rely on it, accepting that religion without using their own reasoning power. It is advisable to allow people to seek the truth through their knowledge and experience with a free mind. This is really an ideal method to introduce a religion, for it avoids various kinds of religious prejudices, blind faith and misunderstanding. Nehru had also mentioned that one should not accept everything written in any holy book in the name of religion. He claimed that the main principle of his religion is that good begets good and bad begets bad. In appreciating the rational approach of Buddhism, in his book The Discovery of India, Nehru had written, Buddha had the courage to point out the unsatisfactoriness of popular religion, superstition, ceremony and priestcraft. He was not interested in the metaphysical and theological outlook, miracles, revelations, and dealings with the supernatural. His appeal was to reason, logic, and experience. His emphasis was on ethics, and his method was one of psychological analysis, a psychology without a soul. His whole approach comes like the breath of the fresh wind from the mountain after the stale air of metaphysical speculations. He goes on to say that the Buddha has taught something greater than all doctrines and dogmas, and his eternal message has thrilled humanity through the ages. Perhaps at no time in the past history was his message of peace more needed for suffering and distracted humanity than it is today. Albert Einstein, in speaking of the religion of the future, says, it should transcend a personal God and avoid dogmas and theology. Covering both the natural and the spiritual, it should be based on a religious sense arising from the experience of all things, natural and spiritual, as a meaningful unity. Buddhism answers this description. The approach taken by the Buddha stands unique in the annals of religious history. He had advised his followers not to accept the Dharma merely out of reverence, but only after investigation. In the discourse to the Kalamas, the inhabitants of a small town called Kesaputa in the kingdom of Kosala, the Buddha had introduced a truly unique charter of free religious inquiry. He taught them how to seek after truth. Yes, Kalamas, it is proper that you doubt, that you have perplexity, for a doubt has arisen in a matter which is doubtful. Now, look you Kalamas, do not be led by reports, or tradition, or hearsay. Be not led by the authority of religious text, not by mere logic or inference, nor by considering appearances, nor by the delight in speculative opinions, nor by seeming possibilities, nor by the idea, this is our teacher. But, O Kalamas, when you know for yourselves that certain things are unwholesome and wrong and bad, then give them up. And when you know for yourselves that certain things are wholesome and good, then accept them and follow them. To many who had gone to him to embrace his teachings, the Buddha had advised them not to do so hastily, but requested them to think carefully whether his teachings really appealed to them as practicable. If they were fully convinced with his method, then only would he accept them as followers. Even after becoming his followers, he had not prevented them from supporting their previous religious teachers. This clearly indicates the extent of freedom he gave to his followers without harboring any jealousy towards other religions. It also illustrates the harmonious attitude towards other religions. Religious harmony. The approach taken by various religionists to introduce their respective teachings to others is an important consideration from the standpoint of religious harmony. Aggressive methods and ruthless means of conversions through force, exploitation of fear, ignorance and emotions, or through material inducements lead to religious misunderstanding and disharmony. True religious harmony can only thrive in an atmosphere of tolerance and understanding. The history of world religions is not free from the taints of bloodshed, war and various forms of aggression, including religious persecutions and inquisitions. In the name of some supernatural being, wars have been fought amongst some so-called religionists. These unscrupulous activities carried out in the name of religion have truly marred the peace-promoting potentials of religion as a whole. They have turned people away from religion. Many have overlooked and disregarded the fact that besides a few religions that have encouraged violence in the name of religion, there are others with more peaceful records. In the long history of Buddhism, there has not been any bloodshed in the course of its propagation. A careful and unbiased study of its historical records will shed light on the peaceful and harmonious nature of the teachings of the Buddha. T.H. Huxley had noted that Buddhism in its original purity knew nothing of the vows of obedience and never sought the aid of the secular arm. Yet spread over a considerable moiety of the old world with marvelous rapidity, and it still with whatever base admixture of forcing superstitions. The dominant creed of a large fraction of mankind. According to observations of Alexander Cunningham, an archaeologist, Buddhists propagated their religion by the persuasive voice of the missionary, many others by the merciless edge of the sword. The sanguinary career of others was lighted by lurid flames of burning cities. The peaceful progress of the Buddhist was illuminated by the cheerful faces of the sick in monastic hospitals, by the happy smiles of travelers reposing in rest houses by the roadside. To Reverend J.T. Sunderland, Buddhism has taught peace more strongly among its followers more effectively, during all its history, than has any other great religious faith known to the world. The people were more spiritual-minded. Unlike the materialists of today, and placed character, service, love, and peace above fame, wealth, supremacy and war. And Buddhism flourished in full bloom at that time because Buddhism is the only religion with no bloodshed or violence. The shining example of Asoka. The classic and outstanding example of Emperor Asoka of India, 264 to 227 BC, clearly illustrates the spirit of Buddhism. At the height of his material glory, after the conquest of a vast extent of Asia, he completely renounced the sword of violence after his acceptance of Buddhism. Through his efforts, Buddhist missionaries have been sent to various parts of his vast empire, which stretched as far as Antioch, Greece, on the western flanks of Asia, as well as abroad, including Sri Lanka and the then known world of Suvarnabhumi, which is often taken as the countries around Southeast Asia. In living up to his religious convictions, he had not forgotten to advise those missionaries not to condemn or run down any other religion while they preached their own. This advice was engraved on an Asoka pillar in Brahmi characters, the ruins of which can still be seen today at Sarnath in Benares, India. The fact that merits noting is that Asoka was extremely energetic in his devotion to the well-being of his people. To this end, he got wells for drinking water dug up, shady trees planted, roads built, public parks and medicinal gardens set up, and hospitals for humans as well as animals established. To infuse righteous spirit in his subjects, whom he was fond of hailing as his beloved children, he had rocks and pillars inscribed throughout the kingdom with the lofty message of righteous living. Ministers and commissioners were appointed to direct and supervise moral culture. The Third Buddhist Council was also patronized by him. The missionaries which he had dispatched to lands near and far had helped to establish cultural contacts of far-reaching import in the sphere of international relations and peace. Asoka's activities evidence beyond doubt that he was a devout exponent of strenuous life for wholesome deeds. Exertion for general welfare and prompt dispatch of business were among some of his main guiding principles. Imbued with remarkable practical sense and dynamism, Asoka displayed in his life the spirit of Buddhism at its best, working in the true spirit of Bahujana Hidaya, Bahujana Sukhaya. For the welfare of the many, for the happiness of the many. An ideal which the Buddha himself had taught to his first group of 60 saintly disciples. Which gave rise to the first missionary religion in the history of humanity. Inspired by the greatness of Asoka, the historian H. G. Wells, in his Outline of History, declared that amidst the tens of thousands of names of monarchs that crowd the columns of history, their majesties and graciousness and serenities and royal highness and the like, the name of Asoka shines, and shines almost alone, a star. With all the inspiration from Asoka at our disposal, an attempt should be made to grow out of the darkness which is enveloping the world today. Religion and materialism. Much of the dark clouds, of turmoil and global problems, can be traced to the decline of religion and the rise of materialism. The history of mankind shows how very often nations have declined and civilizations ruined with the deterioration of religion. The historian, Edward Gibbons, in the History of the Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire had suggested how the breakdown of religion into myriads of forms has been one of the causes contributing towards the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. As it was for Rome, so could it be for our modern civilizations. Realizing the impending dangers, it would be sensible for man today to work in cooperation to check and avoid the causes which could give rise to the decline and breakdown of religion. Whilst religious disharmony through unhealthy competition for converts, fanaticism, and holy wars religion, dogmas and superstitious beliefs destroy the validity of religion in the light of ever-increasing knowledge and scientific investigation. These invariably result in the rise of materialism, bringing about greater moral decay in the human society. In the name of material progress, the mad pursuits of worldly pleasures, power, and possessions have led to all forms of moral degeneration, discrimination and prejudices, even to the extent of justifying mass destruction of mankind. Some of the so-called modern entertainments have been so enacted that they arouse the animal instincts and carnal emotions of the viewers. Under the influence of such intoxication, the viewers often lose control of their senses and do things against their better judgment. By violating the peace and happiness of innocent people in order to satisfy their sensual indulgence, they lose their normal way of thinking, and refuse to listen to others, even though they realize that they are ruining their lives as well as the lives of others. Man's inordinate craving for excessive sensual indulgence has created a sick and aimless society, leading to immoral, unethical and evil practices which are a disgrace to human feelings and dignity. The craze for worldly power have led nations into armaments race, and the invention of lethal weapons that could destroy the world in a matter of seconds have been carried out at the expense of universal hunger and poverty. Warfare has been regarded as an inevitable modern trend and a way of life, at the expense of millions of precious lives. Constructive researches and projected schemes to elevate mankind have either been treated as of secondary importance or totally scrapped in place of short-term material gains. Wisdom handed down by enlightened spiritual masters have fallen onto deaf ears. Their advice to live peacefully and to maintain a moral code of conduct that is applicable universally, have been ignored. Nero's fiddling when Rome's burning. Countries where economic development has reached saturation point in the name of materialistic progress are facing enormous problems with environmental pollutions. The energy crisis, unemployment, inflations, moral degradations, and all the social problems such as drug abuse, serious mental disorders, divorces, suicides, and various forms of diseases. Despite all these tragic and insane occurrences, there are still many in the so-called developing countries in the world which are trying their best to emulate the myriad forms of economic development, aping more and more of the materialistic culture, hoping to turn their homes and countries into material paradises. Like Nero's fiddling when Rome's burning, Such people have failed to learn the mistakes made by others. Amazing confusions. The more people get into the rat race, for the sake of sensual pleasures, power, fame, and glory, the more distractions and confusions they experience, the more will they contribute towards the state of amazing confusions and contradictions which the world is in today. On the one hand, people are afraid of wars, on the other hand, they go all out to prepare for it. They produce in abundance and yet they distribute miseries. Although the world is getting more and more crowded each day, man is feeling lonelier and lonelier. The more leisure hours they have, the more restless they become. Although they are equipped with all kinds of knowledge to get safely to the moon, yet they know not how to live safely on earth. Such are the confusions and contradictions of modern man living in this space age. Yet they are not entirely new to mankind. Confusion arises as long as the taints of delusion are present in the minds of man. Along with other mental defilements, the delusion in man blinds him from the ability to see and understand the true nature of things or the ultimate realities of life. Imbalanced living. The imbalance between material and spiritual development is the cause of gross confusion and dilemma faced by the modern world. Material wealth alone cannot bring peace and happiness to man. Frustrations and disappointments await the imbalanced mind. Unable to find satisfactory ways and means to counter the frustrations of life, people resort to all kinds of drugs and intoxicants as temporary palliative, failing which, they turn to suicides or experience mental disorders. The ever-increasing cases of drug addicts, alcoholics, gamblers, and so forth are the symptoms of imbalanced living. The inclination to lull oneself in the comforts of modern living without any thought of spiritual progress has left man lethargic and redundant. To overcome this, one needs energy, strength, and perseverance which belongs to the realm of faith which is deeply ingrained in religion. Peace through religion. The rapid growth of materialism and imbalanced living has obscured the potentials of peace through religion. World religions today have developed into massive organized institutions, and the original teachings of their respective founders have hardly any influence over their followers in the quality of simplicity, restraint, truthfulness, and selflessness. To realize the real value of religion, a proper understanding of the original messages of religious founders is necessary. The simple moral and ethical values have the greatest potential for peace. The practice of restraint of thoughts brings peace and harmony to the individual, and restraint of speech and bodily actions gives peace to others. It is through these three channels of thought, speech, and bodily actions that all evil or unwholesome actions are performed. They are the doors of the world within where conflicts begin. If this world within is well guarded with heedfulness, the wars and conflicts without would naturally be checked. To know thyself through religion is the guiding principle to peace, for the kingdom of heaven is within. If people can follow genuine religious principles involving moral restraints and the performance of duties and obligations towards one another in society, peace and harmony would naturally follow. The simple advice which the Buddha had given to his followers, in the Sigaloveda Sutta, outlining the duties and obligations between parents and children, teachers and pupils, husbands and wives, friends and friends, employers and employees, and religious teachers and disciples, covers the whole domestic and social duty of the layman. Commenting on this sutta, Mrs. Rhys Davids says, "The Buddha's doctrine of love and goodwill between man and man is here set forth in domestic and social ethics with more comprehensive detail than elsewhere. And truly we may say even now of his vinyat or code of discipline. So fundamental are the human interests involved, so sane and wide is the wisdom that envisages them, that the utterances are as fresh and practically as binding today and here as they were then at Rajagaha. Happy would have been the village or the clan on the banks of the Ganges where the people were full of kindly spirit of fellow feelings. The noble spirit of justice which breathes through these naive and simple sayings. Not less happy would be the village or the family on the banks of the Thames today, of which this could be said. Instead of making religion a way of living, it has been developed into philosophical jargon and become a subject of intellectual exercise and debates. Superstitious practices, magic, and mysticism have been introduced for the glory and gain of one religious group over another. Religions are being used to justify the weaknesses of man, for the greed of gold and power. By inviting such worldly issues into religion in order to carry on something in the name of religion, the religionists of today must understand that these will only cloud and wipe off the real essence of a religious and spiritual way of life. And the real religious values will be more and more obscured to posterity. A silver lining. Whether religion can still bring peace to mankind today is indeed a relevant question. Especially in the light of recent developments in certain parts of the world where religion has literally been taken into the battlefield. Materialism, hypocrisy, and fanaticism masquerading under the guise of religion have been amongst the greatest catastrophes in the history of mankind. To repeat the errors and tragedies of the past, at a time when great world conferences on religion and peace are being held and declarations made for universal peace, universal brotherhood and religious harmony, would be a great hypocrisy and disgrace to the human society. To support such unscrupulous acts in the name of religion is against human decency and dignity. It is not right to fight in battlefields for the sake of peace, for peace is the ability to conquer oneself without inflicting defeat on others. It is fully realized at the point of selflessness. Although certain religionists have chosen, for the greed of gold and worldly power, to engage themselves in religious war, this does not represent the entire realm of religion. It is therefore left to the thinking and peace-loving peoples of today to judge whether the attitudes of such warmongers are justifiable in the name of religion, and whether war and bloodshed should be entirely separated from religion. If people are genuinely interested to seek and work for the peace and happiness for themselves as well as others, it is still not too late, for every cloud has a silver lining. Religious principles and teachings which are worthy of human cultivation and capable of being experienced and realized by oneself still exist. Open to all is the gateway to complete deliverance. One may conquer in battle 1,000 times 1,000 men, yet he is the best of conquerors, who conquers himself. Dhammapada 103.